Okay, morning everyone. We're going to start. I'm just going to say a few words of welcome, and then we'll break into the two groups and have our panel discussions. We are a slightly smaller crowd than yesterday, but I'm sure as the morning continues, we'll see additional people arriving. We have a great panel lined up after this, and then we've got, I think, two panel discussions. After which we'd be having the closing discussion, which will be probably quite interesting insights that we'll get from the last session of the day. So hopefully everyone will be able to continue through the day till that session. Just a few things that for me struck me about yesterday. I think what we saw from the presentations yesterday was the clear benefits of the AfCFTA and regional integration. I think a lot of the economic analysis and the models that were presented all highlighted either strong benefits or statistically significant benefits. The discussions that we had where people had done their other research all showed the benefits of regional integration and the AfCFTA and Africa-wide cooperation. And across things, so trade, infrastructure and logistics. We also heard some of the discussions, benefits for traders, improved outcomes for women and youth. And I think that captures some of it, but there was a lot of other really useful insights during the course of the day yesterday. I think what we also heard was the strong support across the continent for AfCFTA and its alignment with industrial development. Those are important, and given the economic research, we're seeing that that's not misplaced. We're seeing the outcomes very clearly. And what we also heard from some of the presenters yesterday was, sure, there are obstacles, but there's strategies and there's ideas and there are approaches for how we address some of the obstacles that we see to regional integration and implementation, effective implementation of the AfCFTA. One of the things that happened not here, but outside in the broader world yesterday was the US imposed quite hefty tariffs on both India and Brazil. I think you can read about it in the press. It happened for our time quite late yesterday. And I mean, for me, those measures only reinforce the importance of the AfCFTA and regional integration and sends a clear message that we need to drive our own industrialization agenda and our own economic development agenda. We can't look north. There's lots of squabbles, and I think even countries that have traditionally worked very closely with the US are seeing hefty tariffs and other fines being imposed on them, and just re-emphasize for me the importance of what we're discussing at the conference yesterday and today. My last comment is, just from hearing from everyone, and just also the other work that we do, we have all the ingredients. We have the knowledge. We definitely have the ideas that came through yesterday. We have the commitment. We just need to bake the bread or bake the cake. So we need to bring it all together and make it work with all the ingredients and knowledge and commitment so that we achieve the objectives that we set for ourselves. And I think at this stage of the world, we don't have a choice. I think we're going to have to not only bake the bread, but bake really good bread or a very delicious cake. On that happy note, let me invite the first panel that's here to come through. Phumzile is our moderator for the session, and those that want to go to the session next door, if they're not already there, you can go through. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to Saul for opening day 2 for us. Welcome to session 7, titled Unlocking Africa's Industrial Potential under the AfCFTA, Challenges, Enablers, and Strategies. My name is Phumzile Ncube, and I'm from the SARChI Industrial Development at University of Johannesburg. Today, we've got 4 very interesting presentations. that'll run one after the other. Because we're pressed for time, I will be very strict, unfortunately, to our presenters about the 15 minutes that they've been given, so that we can all have a chance to, have a very fruitful discussion afterwards, as we did yesterday. Our first presentation is titled, Will the African Continental Free Trade Area Break Africa's Industrialization Jinx? Historical and Contemporary Perspectives by Dr. Clayton Vhumbunu. Doc, please come through.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day number 2 of our forum. My name is Clayton, as just introduced. My presentation is, will the AfCFTA break Africa's industrialization jinx? And it's a political economy analysis. Okay. Okay, so I'll start by this quotation from Karl Marx. He said that philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. And the point, however, is to change it. The quotation from Marx is just giving us this Marxist thought that at times there is need for us to be more serious on how theory and practice link. At times, I think I'll come to the explanation that we do a lot of interpretation that we do of the world and of the economic world, of course. But when it comes to practice and trying to put into change what we suggest, that's where the issue is, the issue about praxis. Okay, as a way of introduction, I think most of what we are talking about, I mean, in terms of introduction, has been discussed in our previous sessions, that Africa's industrialization and industrial development itself has been very low comparatively, of course, when you compare with other regions in all matrices and indices, be it MVA in terms of manufacturing value added per capita, be it MVA as a share of GDP. If you check the manufacturing employment as a share of total employment, whether you look at industrial production index or competitive industrial performance index and other indices that you can think of, it has been very low. But when the AfCFTA came into place, there was this renewed hope and impetus for industrialization. And of course, we know under Article 3 that there is the industrialization objective that is there. But of course, we need to highlight also that this is not for the first time on the continent. It happened again, even when the tripartite FTA negotiation started around 2008. Then when it was launched in 2015, then last year, you see, it became just adopted in terms of its working with all the ratifications done. But we are saying that the AfCFTA, if you ask me, it's not the first time that we are talking of something that is a bit grand in terms of FTAs. But of course, in terms of scale, now we have 54 countries, unlike the tripartite COMESA, SADC, and EAC, which was a bit regional and not African in terms of geographical coverage. Now, there have been a lot of studies. We had some yesterday that have tried to do some focus based on different computations and other economic modeling approaches that have been used. And all of them, like has been indicated today, they are pointing to the same direction, that the AfCFTA itself has a lot of potential in terms of changing our industrialization fortunes. But political economy perspectives, they are very important whenever we have such discussions, because at times we need to situate such discussions within a more realistic and less abstract setting and context. We need to understand how politics influence economics, and the other way around, also how economics influence politics, and how the success of such schemes like FTAs with the customs union and so forth, they mostly rely and are influenced by historical, political, and social realities within the African context. So this is the setting of my paper. In short, political economy analysis helps us to understand the raw power relations, the political interests, the ideologies, the historical legacies, the conflicts, and political class dynamics, inequalities, and institutions that shape the outcomes of industrialization, not just on the continent, but everywhere where industrialization schemes have been successful, if you check in ASEAN region, EU, and so forth. So that's how I structured my paper there, to take note of these very important aspects. Okay, so you may not, if you look at classical and neoclassical political economy analysis, that there has been a lot of talk of how we look at the colonial industrialization in Africa has been driven and shaped by colonial interests, from colonization and even the post-colonial phase when you talk of neo-colonialism. How the structure of infrastructure in Africa itself has been shaped by such interests, and how the exploitation of natural resources continue to take that direction. So there have been attempts in Africa to industrialize. During the colonial era, where we have this exploitation, the colonial extractive model, then we go to the post-independence African industrialization drive, where we had, just after independence, a lot of African countries tried to have this state-led and import substitution industrialization approach, and it was not succeeding. Then we went into the economic structural adjustment program, and which led to deindustrialization after all the package that came with ESAPs, led by the Bretton Woods institutions. Then now we have this resurgence or renewal of African industrialization. We started around the 2000s, and we have a lot of cases that are thrown around of how there have been successes in terms of special economic zones in other countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, and even here, industrial parks. And also even in the African Union, there have been adoption of a lot of plans and frameworks like the African Mining Vision, the African Commodity Strategy, the Pan-African Manufacturing Plan, and so forth. But all these, we have to take into consideration, like we say, how the political economy realities themselves, they influence the outcomes of industrialization. There I'm trying to just paint a picture of how, for real, the effects in terms of the framework that we have and the results that we have can be able to drive industrialization. So when it comes to share of world arable land, we are up there. The share of world uncultivated land, we are up there. Africa's share of mineral resources, we are up there. Even when you look at how we have the raw materials in terms of the endowments, they are up there. But they continue to contribute a lot in terms of unprocessed exports, and we have less FDI inflows, and even our export trade is very miniature if you compare it, again, like I indicated, with other regions. Now, my paper, in summary, highlighted the fact that indeed there is potential in the AfCFTA. I'm not sure what's happening. There is potential in the AfCFTA trying to drive industrialization because of those 6 factors: enlarged markets, stimulating intra-African trade, incentives for creation of regional value chains, and also that push for harmonization of trade investment instruments and rules, and also attracting FDI in those sectors of industrial development and boosting industrial intra-African trade. But my paper then identified 4 historical and contemporary perspectives that are within the PE factors or political economic factors, which I feel they constitute what the Francophone call the problematic when we try to talk of how the AfCFTA can drive industrialization. First is colonial legacies, which I'll talk about briefly, and structural economic obstacles. Then there's limited state capacity and governance deficiencies. Then the political will that we were talking about yesterday again, and elite interests and racial culture that is within most African countries. Then the regional integration impediments that are there within the system. So first, okay, this just is a conceptual presentation of how it looks like, the factors. So first is the colonial legacy. So first of all, I think what we need to understand is that which all the political economists and even economic historians have talked about is how we continue to perpetuate the colonial extractive model even up to today because of how it is so complex to dismantle it. We continue to have these colonially inherited economic systems in Africa. I mean, it's an effect from Cape to Cairo that you see the dominance of the MNCs in the extractive industry, even in the global financial institutions, how they influence such, and how we struggle to have our own inclusive, independent industrialization processes, policies, and strategy. Now, within that fact, what we need to understand is that even if you look at the estimates that are provided by UNCTAD, for instance, that 60 to 90% of the extractive industries in Africa, they are heavily dominated by MNC. It's a fact. And our industrial policies, most of the time, they find they are very weak to control these MNCs in terms of how they engage themselves. We look at the oil industry for oil producing countries. If you look at all those countries that produce oil in Africa, look at Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Sudan, South Sudan, and so forth. Collectively, Africa produces about 10 million barrels per day, which translates to 3.65 billion barrels per year. It meets the crude oil demand in Africa, which is 4.5 million. But what happens, 75% is exported crude, and the rest Africa then imports. Of course, there are some cases that have been highlighted, like the Dangote case in Nigeria, where we now have a new plant and new refinery capacity there. But again, the system is not as adequate as it is across all African countries. So you look again, the case that I gave there of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, producing about 60% of world cocoa, but they are benefiting less than 10% of the over 100 billion global chocolate industry. So we are saying that the colonial legacies and neo-colonial interests, they are still compounded by structural economic factors. Limited government and private sector capacity to be active industrialization, infrastructure, refinery capacity, high cost of energy, logistics, and so forth. Then the second point that I highlight is on limited state capacity, that the capacity of the state, not just to design policy, but also to exercise governance. If you look at all governance matrices, be it more Ibrahim, which is more grounded and African, because we have a tendency of saying some of the metrics are not controlled by us as Africans. But you find that almost all of them, including the World Bank, very few countries, they rank high. A lot of them, they rank very low when it comes to governance issues, governance effectiveness, issues of corruption, and so forth. So there is a very bad track record of all this, yet we are saying that governance itself is a sine qua non for effective trade policy. So on Mo Ibrahim, just a snapshot. All the countries collectively, we are less than 50% in terms of the score because it goes from 0 to 100. But this is how we fare from 2014 to 2023 in Africa. But what does it mean? It means then we don't have the governance infrastructure or basis for us to exercise effective trade policy. African map is ranked dark there because of what we see in terms of corruption. Again, it's a challenge when it comes to rent seeking. I will just quickly wrap up. Political will itself is lacking because the commitment is not there. We have been losing a lot of money and there's rent-seeking behavior that we need to highlight when it comes to political will, that political will is not just about the ratification of agreements. It's about that commitment that you give when you ratify. What do you do? If you continue to have NTBs and so forth against trade, then there is not political will to talk about. I won't get much into details. I'll go to the last point on regional integration aspects. What we need to highlight on this is that the truth of the matter is that when it comes to regional integration, it's still very weak on all aspects again. We need to understand that most of the aspects themselves that need to be addressed are how we can regain some policy space on how to promote our local industries. After losing so many within the multilateral trade system, within bilateral engagement that we have with different countries and so forth. In conclusion, quickly, in less than a minute because of time, what I just say is that indeed we agree that there is this opportunity for Africa to break the industrialization jinx, but the truth of the matter is that it will struggle, even with all the focus that we have, if there is no address of the structural political economy issue that we've talked about. Because as we speak right now, against all the matrices in terms of politics and governance, there's no sufficient evidence to demonstrate that significant efforts are being made to overcome political economy obstacles or challenges that are there for industrialization. So the recommendations that I just suggested are those, that these need to be addressed. They need to reform the governance mechanisms. Public sector institutions, they are supposed to be reformed again. There's need for real rule of law because it relates to FDI, manufacturing base. Then also emphasis on integration of economies. And lastly, how the public leadership can be incentivized to see the importance of exercising political will on all the aspects of integration. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Clayton, for your presentation and also doing it well within your time. Our next presentation, is titled Trade Finance in Intra-African Trade under AfCFTA. I understand that it will be presented by both Beatrice Mbinya and Ndirangu Ngunjiri.
Good morning for physical participants and virtual. I wish to welcome to our presentation this morning. My name is Ndirangu Ngunjiri. My colleagues Beatrice Mbinya and Anthony Kamau, all of us from the University of Nairobi. I wish to welcome to our presentation. We are discussing about the financing. We find under the AfCFTA we need SMEs financing because that's a gap that we have the products to trade, but how does the financing? Where do we get the financing as SMEs? That's why we are doing this paper for us to go through it. We find that inter-African trade, continental perspective, remain very low. In between us as Africans, we trade among us ourselves. You find most of our other African countries, most of our product is sourced from China and other European countries and America. But in between us, as we don't trade so much. For example, to find the coffee in Kenya, we don't sell locally. We sell to Europe, we sell to America, but we don't sell in African. And also you find that typically 12 to 18% of African total trade, that's what we do compared to 65% in Europe. That's what we do. So you find that it's only 12%, 20% we do among ourselves. But when you talk about Europe, we trade with them 65%. And we are through the AfCFTA, we try to create single market that will boost regional value chain and foster economic integration. And when you have this community integration, then we need to finance it. Yet African in the global, we only do 3%. That's according to UNTAD 2024. Only 3% as African we contribute to the global trade. And the key challenges of this is finance, because as Africans, for us to participate in a global trade, we need financing to be there. And African face annual trade gap estimated to be around 8 million USD. And SMEs often have the high rejection in the trade finance, sometimes exceeding over 50%. And this makes the SMEs not participate in this trade. Then that's why the pass came, and then the pass came. It's to make it easier for cross-border payment and trade finance to be made easier. Inter-regional trade shares timelines of pass and AfCFTA, and we find that through these, pass will help us to make trade payment easier between us as Africans, and also make Africans trade among themselves more. For example, for me to trade with another country in Africa, I need to get to exchange dollar first, go and buy dollar, then come with the product. So you find there's a true payment, because buy dollar, then come buy the product, then sell. And then the person I'm trading with, then you go sell the product in dollar form and then buy back the dollars. The policy issue and the key objective of our study, the key problem is AfCFTA is a digital trade solution like PASS for the immense transformation in this and potential of inter-African trade. There is a critical and more comprehensive empirical evidence that provides the actual combination of this in trade volumes. How can we combine these two to have a trade volumes and make more payment efficiency? And the key point is, how do governments, African government, that is, and the other financial institution, the African institution and the global institution, strategically protect the investment and foster digital adaptation in the trade in Africa? And how do trade finance provision and digital solutions, particularly under AfCFTA, influence the inter-African trade? And what are the associated challenges? We find we have different challenges, different opportunities. How can we as Africans use the challenges and opportunity to make the trade more comprehensive? The objective of our study, we want to study to assess the current state and of the trade finance and also provision of the inter-African trade since the operation of AfCFTA, and also analyze the impact of trade financing and availability of and cost of intra-African trade among the SMEs and under the agreement. And finally, to identify the key challenges and opportunity in the provision and uptake of digital trade finance and solutions. Theoretically, we have developed, we are using theoretical framework and empirical studies that I've done there before with the inter-African trade and FTA role, but transformation that was done by Songea and Ari in 2019. We will also look about the trade finance landscape and the financing gap, but digital financing could solve this problem, and also digital transformation and the PASS. And we find when the PASS was brought about, the major purpose of PASS was to make inter-African payment to be made easier and cross-border efficiency payment to be there, and also microeconomic and structure factor in the infrastructure development, the deficit we have, infrastructure, and also look about the exchange rate vulnerability. We find the exchange rate keep on changing time of time, and the cost of exchange rate goes to the cost of the products. The gap is actual and other impact of both AfCFTA and operationalization, and the past launching on the inter-African trade. And how can we moderate the role of infrastructure and institutional quality or in driving this?
All right, thank you. So based on our theoretical framework, we focus on 4 theories. First, we have the gravity model of trade, which helps us to understand our economic size and distance, which includes which is a factor that derives trade costs. influence trade flows. And also we have the financial development theory that explains how well-developed financial systems reduce transaction costs and also facilitate trade. And then the other theory that we have the transaction cost economics, which focuses on the efficiency of technological innovations such as the Pan-African payment systems and how it reduces the cost of doing transaction. And then finally we have the network effect, which is a key factor that influences how fast people they're going to use any digital platform such as the PAP system. So our study focuses on 15 African economies that we sample out for the period of 2018 to 2023, and this time frame allows us to compare or to capture the baseline period, that is the period between 2018 and 2019, because PAPS was launched in 2019 in January, and then what happens next? That's now the period between 2019 and 2023. And for the countries that were sampled, first, we have countries from West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, North Africa, and Central Africa. And the criteria that we used was that each country that was sampled first, they had to have ratified and signed the AfCFTA agreement, so that we could, and then the other factor, the other criteria was they had to already be using the PAP system in their trade. So in terms of our methodology, we use a panel data for the period 2018 to 2023, and based on the three objectives that we had. For the first objective, the trade finance availability and the cost on intra-African trade flows, we model the natural logarithm of intra-African trade value, which is explained by trade finance availability, the natural log of average cost of trade finance, and we also control the model using the real GDP growth rate, exchange rate volatility, and a dummy of AfCFTA operationalization. Then for the second objective, whereby we look at SMEs participation under the AfCFTA framework, we include trade finance availability, the natural log of trade finance cost, and also we control using the other factors, including financial sector development. And then to capture the challenges and opportunities, whereby we now look at how PAP's system has enabled payment efficiency. Our dependent variable is the natural log of cross-border payment efficiency, which we capture in days, because the data that we use, it captures the PAP system in days. And then we have the natural log of the volume, I mean the amount of money that is transacted through the PAP system, and how that is affected by the financial development, access to internet, and also whether a country is a member of AfCFTA or not. So in terms of descriptive statistics, we find that the natural log of intra-African trade value has an average of 8.95 million USD, with a standard deviation of 1.25, and with a variation of between 47 and 50. And then in terms of SMEs access to trade finance, we see an average of 42.50%, meaning that on average, less than half of the SMEs that in our sample have access to trade finance, ranging from a low of 15% to a high of 60%. And then in terms of cross-border payment efficiency, we see that the average payment duration is between is 1.15 billion. But variables like the transaction volume and the number of participants, they are few observation, meaning that not from very few countries have actualized. I mean, they have adopted the use of the PAP system. Then for empirical study, I mean, for empirical findings, we find that trade finance availability index has a statistically significant positive coefficient of 0.035, indicating that greater availability of trade finance improved intra-African trade. In regards to the average cost of trade finance, it's also highly significant, but on the negative side, meaning that high cost of trade finance reduces the trade volume. Then real GDP rate is positive, meaning that countries with higher GDP, they experience high trade volumes. Then for the dummy on FCTA operation, we see a significant positive coefficient of 0.18, which implies that FCTA is improving intra-African trade. So moving to our second objective, we see that the natural log of PAP's transaction volume is highly significant and positive at 0.15, meaning that every 1% increase in PAP's transaction volume led to an increase of 0.15% in intra-African trade, meaning that PAP system is an important driver for the trade volumes in Africa. Then when we consider the number of PAP participants, we see a significant and positive effect, meaning that the more number of participating financial institution is, the higher the trade volume. And then when we consider the cross-border payment efficiency, we see a significant negative coefficient, meaning that efficiency in cross-border reduces the payment times, which directly improves intra-African trade. Then for our last objective, whereby we wanted to look at now the effects of the PAPs, we established that the natural log of PAP's transaction volume is highly significant and positive, implying that the greater utilization of PAP's system directly and significantly improve payment efficiency across the borders, and also the financial sector development also as a important role, whereby we see a strong with a strong and positive relationship, meaning that well-developed financial systems are important for African SMEs to leverage on digital payment solutions. Then also internet penetration is a key driver, and also the implementation of FCTA for every country that we sampled, we also see a positive relationship. So meaning that it also improves the payment efficiency. So in regards to our conclusion, we conclude that the implementation of FCTA has boosted the intra-African trade, while the PAP system is a crucial driver, which has increased transaction volume and has enabled more participating institutions, which has in the long run increased trade volumes and also improved the payment efficiency. We also find that financial development and internet penetration are foundational factors that are essential for digital trade finance gains, and also availability of trade finance is strong, and yet we see variation across the sampled countries that we had in our sample. So our study recommends that there is need for African economies to champion the PAP's adoption and also its expansion, and also to deepen the financial sector. So we thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our third presentation is titled Value Creation, Capture and Redistribution in Food Value Chains in East and Southern Africa by Mahuma.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting the paper that is co-authored with some of my colleagues. So I'm from the Center of Competition, Regulation and Economic Development. So what we are doing on this paper, we're looking at the link between concentration, power, as well as governance structures in the outcomes that are being observed in two value chains. So we're looking at maize meal as well as soybeans. So maize meal, as we are aware, in the different countries, is a staple food that is either processed or consumed as it is. Soybeans are processed to produce vegetable oil and also soya meal, which is an input into animal feed. So what we're doing in the paper is we're linking the outcomes of these two value chains to three main things. Firstly, market concentration, market failures, as well as the ad hoc trade restrictions. So the way that we're doing it, we're taking wholesale prices from producing areas, adding transport cost, and then imputing an import parity price and looking at the actual prices in the consuming areas versus the import parity prices, and then trying to explain those differences looking at these three factors that we mentioned in the beginning. So maybe just to give a bit of background, in terms of maize, South Africa is by far the largest maize producer across the region. So we're mainly looking at East and Southern Africa. But because South Africa produces maize using genetically modified seeds, it's not really a source of imports for some of the countries in the region because they don't allow GMO seeds. So in a way, South Africa is excluded from the study because there's not much intertrade between these countries and South Africa because of the use of GMO seeds. So excluding South Africa, Tanzania is the largest producer, followed by Kenya, Malawi, Uganda, as well as Zambia. So in most years, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zambia are net exporters, while Malawi produces for its own population, while Kenya in most countries is a net importer. So what we've shown in the graph below is the production from 2015. You see an upshoot in Tanzania's production from 2023 to 2024. That is mainly on two bases. So there was abundant rains in Tanzania during that that production season, as well as the government decided to introduce subsidies of fertilizer. So fertilizer is one of the inputs used in farming, and the more it's being used, the higher the output. So the government introduced fertilizers in Tanzania during that period, and we see that also contributed in the increased production of maize in the country. So the weather effect also played a role because there were good rains in East Africa during that time, and then we will see it the inverse for Zambia when you look in the next chart. So in terms of soybean, again, South Africa is by far the largest producer, but for the same reason, we don't include it here because of GMO seeds that it uses, while other countries don't necessarily want to import from those countries that use GMO seeds. So outside of South Africa, we've got Zambia, Malawi, and Uganda as the main producers. Zambia and Malawi have been net exporters in most years. And then Kenya and Zimbabwe are net importers as well. And also, as I highlighted here, you'll see for Zambia, there's a substantial reduction in the production from 2023 to 2024. Again, that is mainly because during that season, opposite to Tanzania, there were droughts that happened in Zambia. So there were a lot of droughts happening in Zambia. And because most of the farming here is using rain-fed, so there's little irrigation that is being used here, production plummeted because of that. And also, in the previous season, farmers got very low prices for soybeans. And as a result, they decided to farm less of soybeans and they farm something else. Again, these are all smallholder farmers, so they farm different things depending on where the prices are and where the conditions are favorable. So we see also weather playing a role significantly here in these two value chains. And what is good about the region is that when one region's got bad rains, the other one will have good rains. So as a result, on net effect, the region as a whole shouldn't see these price spikes because on a net effect, there is enough to feed the whole region. But because of issues that we'll identify at the end, this is where we see this upshoot in prices. This is where we see all these other issues, mainly because of the other factors. Yes, weather is important, but we're fortunate in the region that you've got this differences in the patterns across the different sections of the region. Just to give a brief background on the market structure. So on maize trading, so we're mainly looking at the wholesale level here. Maize trading in our focus countries, in the different countries, there's few traders, but it's not as concentrated at the regional levels as opposed to soybeans. So soybeans across our focus countries, so there are four main vertical integrated traders. So as I explained, soybeans mostly is processed to do vegetable oil and also soya meal, which is used as an input into animal feed. So these are the main processors that will then buy from the farmers and then sell across the different countries. So you see in Malawi, ETG is also present in Zambia as well. Mount Meru is present across the 3 countries we're looking at, the main producers. Woolma in 2, Sunseed in 2, and then you've got the local producers here. So what we're saying here is that concentration is a big issue in soybeans, especially at the trading level, and this explains some of the dynamics that we'll see. Whilst for maize, it's not so much a problem. Yes, individually in the countries, it is concentrated, but we don't see the regional groups across the different countries. So this is our main analysis that we have done. So on my left, I'm not sure whether it's your right. Yeah, I think that'll be all right. So on my left, you'll see we've tried to compute the prices. So these are all wholesale prices across the different countries that we're looking at. Yes, we included South Africa as a proxy for international comparisons, but as we indicated, South Africa is not really a source because of the GMO seeds. So you'll see the variability between the net importers and the net exporters. So as we've indicated there, Kenya is mostly a net importer, and you see that across the board, the prices have been significantly higher in Kenya as opposed to other countries. Malawi as well, although it produces enough for its own consumption, the prices are still high. So what we see here is that we see a large difference in margins between net and export importers, as well as the variability over time. And on the right-hand side, what we try to do then is to say, we're taking prices from the producing areas. So this is in Uganda, this is southwest of Tanzania, as well as in Zambia. And then that is the line at the bottom, the blue line. So these are the prices, the average prices across all these producing areas. We then imputed an IPP. So we took those prices from the producing areas, we added transport costs and other costs to then see if these prices were then to be exported to the consuming areas. And the consuming areas here, we're looking at Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, which are then what we term as the consuming areas. So effectively, what we see here between the IPP and the actual prices in the consuming area, there's a huge difference in the margins. And this is mainly because the traders are able to arbitrarily charge these higher prices effectively by moving products from the producing areas to the consuming area. There's no value addition that has been done. Then there's nothing that has been done on that aspect. And we'll explain some of the reasons why this is the case when we get to the reasons why we see the variability. So you see the margins, especially from 2022, all the way up until perhaps January 2024, you see these huge differences in the margin, which is not explained, which is not reasonable. So one could argue to say, well, they need to make a margin because they are trading. But even if you assume a reasonable margin there of about maybe 10 to 15 or 20%, the difference is still huge. It doesn't make sense why you've got this huge disparity in the prices between the consuming as well as the producing countries. We did something similar for soybeans, where on the left-hand side, we're looking at the prices. So we see similar outcomes as well. And then we also did a similar exercise in terms of the producing areas, which is here we're looking at Lusaka. And then the consuming areas are still the same, Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. And then we did the IPP as well. So interesting here is that at some point, you see the convergence between the actual prices and the IPP prices. So there is some form of, market clearance of some sort. And I think this also gave us comfort in what we are doing to say that actually there is a convergence in the IPP prices and actual prices. So our calculations seems to be correct because we are taking into account all the other factors. But in the prior periods, you also see these huge spikes between the consuming areas and the producing areas. And again, there's not much valuation which is being done here. So people are just basically taking from the producing to the consuming, they're adding all these huge margins that we are observing here. And then on this slide, we are then explaining the factors behind this difference in, this difference in the prices as well as the variability. So for soybeans, our main explanation is concentration. As explained, the 4 main traders, they are trading across multiple countries, which is the main producing areas. So high concentration is an issue because then they are able to charge these arbitrary high margins because they know there's not much competition coming elsewhere. So this is mainly for soybeans. Also the market failure. So there's not much information available about prices. So customers are not aware whether they can get prices cheaper somewhere else and all of these things. And even the farmers, we showed the example of Zambia at some point, say the farmers were getting low prices because also they don't know whether they're able to get somewhere else. And this is what we're trying to do as a center, to bring forth these issues of transparency and hopefully help in solving the issues of markets not working well. Then on maize, the biggest issue is trade restrictions. So trade restrictions have been put in place by most of these countries that we're looking at. So maybe just to go back a bit. So you'll see Kenya here has got the highest price and the net importer. Kenya has put trade restrictions of imports across the analysis period in a couple of periods for one reason or the other. And also some of the exporters. So Zambia has put export restrictions, so has Malawi has put export restrictions. And what is interesting here is that with the exception of Tanzania and South Africa, all of these countries are COMESA member states. So there is already some protocols to allow for free movements, but there's always these national imperatives where, you know, restrictions are put in place for one reason or the other. And what it does is that it then makes that benefit of getting, you know, prices from across other boards to constrain the local traders, that benefit is lost, because if you're restricting imports, it means that you're effectively saying that whoever is trading in the country has no competition because there's no potential of someone else coming from another place. So we're saying this is the main issue in maize, and we understand that maize is a political crop, it's sensitive and all of those things, but it almost undermines the idea of having free trade if you can impose these ad hoc restrictions, and there need to be a mechanism to make sure that these are put in place. I mean, there's a way to almost limit and govern them, because they effectively, you know, take away from the benefit of having open markets at the end. And our conclusion is that weather realities are a factor, so we'll get extreme weathers. That's something that we need to live in. But as a region, we're fortunate that when one region's got drought, the other one will have abundant rain. So there's no reason why we should be seeing these high prices if markets were working well in terms of price and trading. And some of the issues that is really limiting this ability of markets to work well is this ad hoc trade restrictions, which is something that needs to be looked into. And also it favors the incumbents. It favors those traders that are within those specific countries. So this is mainly for maize. And then for soybeans, it's the issue of concentration. So there's high concentration across the different countries and the region as well. And this will require a regional approach. And we're saying that as much as free trade is good and we see the benefits, but one needs to make sure that markets are working well. And this is where competition authorities have got a role to play, especially at the regional level, because these are all regional issues. It doesn't make sense for a national authority to look at them because they've got limitation in terms of where they can go and the borders as well. So we're saying this is the thing that needs to be taken into account, because once borders are open and what is free movement of goods, but if the producers are still concentrators or the traders, it means that they've got a larger scale where to exploit the market power and charge higher prices. And at the end, you'll have, you know, many more consumers who will be harmed because of this aspect here. So we're saying that it's important to look at how markets are working, to understand and have a regional approach in solving these issues, because they are regional in nature. And then also the issues of trade restrictions, it needs to be looked at to say when you know, countries sign up, there's a mechanism to make sure that, you know, whatever the specific countries like to do doesn't at the end limit the benefits that comes with all these free trade movements that we're advocating for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arthur, for your presentation. Our final presentation, staying on the regional and regional value chain front, is titled Championing Regional Integration, Leveraging Resource Value Chains to Drive Industrial Development Across SADC by Tigere Mparutsa. David, you can proceed to share your screen.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody in the room and online. My name is Tigere Mparutsa. I'll be presenting a paper called Regionally Integrated Hub and Spoke Model for Critical Mineral Beneficiation in Africa. Firstly, I apologize for not being in the room or in presence, attending the SADC Industrialization Week, which is very close to some of the work that we've come up with in this paper. So I'll ask you to move to the next slide very quickly. Yeah, so how the presentation will flow, I will quickly look at the existing African trade ecosystem, as well as some of the objectives that the AfCFTA is looking to achieve. We'll look at a little bit of obstacles of regional integration, what's stopping us from actually being able to do this. We'll then zone in on some of the critical minerals that exist in Southern Africa and look at how we could use those to drive regional integration. So I'll ask we go to the next slide. We can skip the header and go straight to the next slide. So if you look at the existing African trade ecosystem, you can tell that inter-African trade is up 12.4% year on year between 2023 and 2024. But it still just accounts for 14% of all trade across Africa. So the stat here is that Africa is definitely trading more with the East and the West than it is with ourselves. Another stat we looked at here was intermediate goods. Intermediate goods basically represent your integration into manufacturing value chains, and 77% of all intermediate goods traded on the continent are being traded outside of Africa. So it is effectively telling us that we are trading more into global supply chains than feeding our own supply chains. If we then take a closer look at the regional contributions to intra-African trade, you can tell there that Southern Africa is definitely the dominant region in terms of all trade across Africa, constituting 30% of all trade in Africa. And South Africa, just the one country alone, constitutes 20% of that. So a lot of the regional trade, although it's increasing, is still very much spatially concentrated within Southern Africa. West Africa coming up second there, but that's largely because of oil and gas in Nigeria, and East Africa taking up the third spot there. Can we move to the next slide? Good. So what is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement looking to achieve? So it's effectively looking to achieve a single marketplace that's 1.3 billion people, 55 member states, as well as GDP of 3.4 trillion. So it's looking to achieve a single market place across all of Africa, and position African economies actually beyond commodity extraction. That said, there's still a lot of structural constraints. I think many of them have already been mentioned. The first one being misaligned production base. So a lot of countries in Africa simply lack the manufacturing capacity to be able to produce, large scale, manufactured goods, and they lack the supply chain diversity to be able to, manufacture goods and services. So still a lot of, constraints in terms of getting the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to a point where we're actually fully utilizing it. That said, progress to date, 48 countries have signed up, but there are only 7 trading countries that are trading under, AfCFTA. I've just read a stat that Namibia was the 8th country which just now sent its first shipment, I believe, of salt to Cameroon. I think 25,000 tons of salt shipped from Namibia to Cameroon. So we're now on 8 trading countries, but still a significant way for us to grow to actually get to all 55 member trades trading under AfCFTA. Let's move to the next slide, please. Obstacles to regional integration. I've basically then, driven them into 3 different pillars. So we've got obstacles around hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, as well as policy misalignment. The biggest obstacle around hard infrastructure is our lack of, transport networks. So it is 56% more expensive to get goods into, Africa than anywhere else in the world. And if you look at the cost of producing or the cost of any good, 40% of that is on transport costs. So it already means that our goods are going to be much more expensive than goods manufactured elsewhere in the world. Power generation, obviously still an issue. 30 African states still have significant load shedding. And we have limited, transboundary electricity trade. I believe the Southern African power pool is only one of the only transboundary electricity trades across the continent. Ports activity, again, still a major challenge. Look at the east coast of Africa from Dar es Salaam all the way to Durban, littered with ships trying to get into the port and trying to get their goods out. So significant challenges in terms of hard infrastructure. From a soft infrastructure point of view, lack of seamless systems to move goods, especially across borders. You talk to people involved in intra-African trade or cross-border trade, saying every border crossing is different, based on the border official that you're dealing with. So we need to have policies in place that make sure that cross-border trade is efficient, and it's unique in the sense that every single border crossing you have is exactly the same. The last pillar which you have spoken about there is policy misalignment. That's driven by domestic policies or domestic priorities driving industrialization policies. So countries are looking to drive industrialization in isolation and not looking at what is happening within the region and how they could partner with other countries within the region to drive greater industrialization. Let's move to the next slide, please. So if we look at the mineral landscape across Africa, so 30% of all global critical minerals are available in Africa. So these are minerals like cobalt, lithium. If we look at reserves, I think those stats have already been mentioned. 92% of platinum minerals available in Africa, particularly in Southern Africa, 50% of cobalt, 42% of manganese. That said, still a massive processing gap. So raw materials yield far less value than refined products. Example, which I've stated there, is bauxite and aluminium. So if you look at the cost of bauxite, fetches $60 per ton, whereas once that bauxite is processed to aluminium, that fetches $2,300 per ton. So a lot of value addition that we're losing out on from just sending raw materials and not processed goods into the global economy. The map on the right then basically shows the mineral resources available across Africa. And I want to zone in, if you look at the bottom of that map of Southern Africa, just to look at the concentration of resources across Southern Africa. So the paper then looks at really how do we take Southern Africa as an example to drive critical mineral beneficiation across the continent. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so from a regional, point, of view, for us to really drive regional beneficiation, I'm talking about integration of beneficiation, we need regional coordination, as well as industrial capacity. Regional collaboration, I've given one example there. South Africa has got a significant amount of high-tech skills involved in lots of high-tech manufacturing. We could then link that with, Mozambique and gas-fed energy from Mozambique. So use Mozambique to feed energy into South Africa for manufacturing capability. So that looks at some of the regional collaboration that is required going forward to really drive industrialization. Let's move to the next slide. Yeah, so why particularly use SADC as a platform? And I've said I think SADC presents probably the most immediate platform, to drive critical mineral beneficiation. Why is that the case? SADC has got a multiple, number of factors within its benefit. It's got significant mineral wealth. It's got manufacturing capacity, particularly in South Africa, and it does have a little bit of regional infrastructure already in place. So if you look at examples of minerals, cobalt in DRC, lithium in Zimbabwe, graphite in Mozambique, and you've got PGMs in South Africa. So a wide range of commodity goods available in SADC. You've got emerging initiatives around SADC industrialization strategy, which is already looking to collaborate, drive industrialization, drive value beneficiation across the region. You've got the Southern African Power Pool, which looks to basically create a platform to trade electricity across the region. And you've got regional transport corridors as well, the Trans-Kalahari Corridor to mention, connecting South Africa, Botswana, as well as Namibia. So you already have some infrastructure already to drive beneficiation of critical minerals. What is SADC's role in this? SADC needs to basically then make sure that countries are avoiding isolated extraction. They need to ensure that we're pooling sovereign capabilities as well as sovereign financing. So financing needs to come into the region and not into a particular market, and then also align fragmented investments to ensure that the region can collaborate closely together. Let's go to the next slide. I basically then looked at a few of examples of where regional integration has worked. We've taken the European Union, probably the most advanced model to date. Key lesson there for Africa, supranational fiscal tools really required to ensure that, we close the disparity between countries within a region. We've looked at the Asian model as well, and that's a very interesting model, which has actually been led by the private sector. They've created what they call Factory Asia. So you find that different countries are involved in manufacturing specific parts of the value chain based on cost competitiveness. Key lesson for Africa there is that you can actually have the private sector drive collaboration, regional collaboration, and not depend on the government. Two other models we looked at was the Gulf Corporation, which really looks at creating regional infrastructure, especially around electricity and transport, and the Greater Mekong sub-region, which I said, develop infrastructure first and then drive industrial development on the back of the infrastructure that you've developed. Yeah, so the concept of the hub and spoke model is what we've also introduced in this paper, which looks at 3 different types of hubs. So an anchor hub will really drive large-scale manufacturing, advanced manufacturing and beneficiation. So for instance, South Africa can be an anchor hub for auto manufacturing because it already leads in the sector. And then those anchor hubs are then supported by support hubs, which will then provide potential energy or logistics to anchor hubs. So you could have Mozambique being a support hub, providing energy. You could have Botswana being a logistics hub for dry ports. And those support hubs will then be supported by specialized nodes, and specialized nodes will then be really involved in the niche manufacturing activities to support hubs as well as the anchor hubs. So that's the concept of the hub and spoke model around anchor hubs, support hubs, and specialized nodes. If I can move to the next slide as well. Yeah, you cannot talk about industrial development without talking about the role of SMEs. SMEs offer unique advantages. They're very adaptive. They're close to the market. So they could act as tier 2, tier 3 suppliers into these value chains. They could act as local subcontractors. Critical here that we then develop a policy framework that allows those SMEs to access those markets. So cluster-based procurement programs is key. Make sure SMEs get access to regional trade financing, as well as cross-border supplier development programs to plug those SMEs into regional value chains. Yeah, we then looked at some of the initiatives that are existing at the moment that is driving regional trade across Africa. So you've got the South African Critical Minerals and Metal Strategy that's really looking to position South Africa as a nucleus for processing, infrastructure, and manufacturing and beneficiation. You've got Continental Alignment. You've got DRC and Zambia Battery Value Chain Project that's already up and going, as well as SADC's Regional Industrial Development Plan. So you do have policies that's already supporting the growth of collaboration across the continent. Last slide really looks at the role of the financial services sector in this. African Development Bank estimates anywhere between the region of the 68 billion or 108 billion financing gap for infrastructure projects on an annual basis. So a massive financing gap from an infrastructure development point of view. We need to have a different way of looking at how we're financing these projects. We need to blend multi-sovereign financing. So again, attract financing into a region and not into a particular country. Role of financial institutions, we've tackled that a little bit at a transactional level, really ensure that the right amount of trade financing and working capital optimization goes out into these value chains, as well as project financing to ensure that create SPVs for infrastructure development, syndication of DFIs, institutional investors, as well as sovereign guarantees. And most importantly, I think because financial institutions face off with various clients across the region, they need to be ensured that they're front and center at helping those financial institutions connect with each other across the regions, because we can see where the gaps are. It's very important that we assist the region in closing those gaps. Thank you. I'll end the presentation there.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. We had 4 really good presentations spanning, regional finance, financial architecture, regional value chains, and trade.
Strategies do we have in place to support community property associations that have arable land that would want to focus on biofuel and renewable energy? Thank you.
So who are your questions directed to?
Financing.
David, the last presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, you can go ahead, ma'am. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. My question is to Khomotso about soya and maize. He spoke about, I think it was the maize prices, differences between production and the consumption areas, I suppose across all those sampled countries. So what is the effect of this and what is the solution? And I just want to refer to, excuse me, the soya situation in South Africa. And we are having what has been termed location differentials. And you find that the consumption zones, and I think these are the ones further south, are actually opting to import because the whole system of getting the soya from the production region ends up with that soya being more expensive than the imported soya. So I understand there's currently piloting of different differential pricing levels to address these things. Another question I have, you mentioned the issue with soya is competition, and we need regional competition control. So I just want to understand, how is that going to look? What is the proposal? Do we have regional competition authorities? I only know our one in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, ma'am. David, I understand you didn't hear the first questions that were directed to you. If I
No.
So if I paraphrase them correctly, I understand the first question was what is being done to assist SMEs in the mining value chain, and also with regard to agro-processing, assisting SMEs in agro-processing with relation to biofuels. I'm not sure if I'm characterizing your questions correctly. Community property associations. I'm not sure if you can touch on that one as well, but maybe do your best to respond to those when the time comes. Is that, was
Can I
that
respond?
clear? No, not yet. We've got two more questions. I just wanted to give you those questions to think about while we go through the last two. Yeah, thanks.
Good morning. My name is Sebongile. I'd like to thank the presenters for the insightful presentations this morning. I was happy to see some overlaps in terms of the importance of the role of infrastructure, seeing that I was completely thrown off due to technical issues yesterday. So thank you for that. Mine is just a comment. I wanted to say that while trade finance is important, but it is equally important to also build the capacity of small businesses in the areas of logistics, market research, and compliance with regulations. We already know that in South Africa, we have a high failure of SMMEs. It's about between 60 to 80% of them do not make it within the 2 years of their operations. So it is key for us to assist SMMEs build or develop robust strategies and leadership acumen to be able to leverage the unified African market. Otherwise, we might open the market, but only the established companies will benefit, or larger economies, if we don't build the capacity of our SMMEs to export their products. Thank you.
So is your comment general to all of the presenters? It's or
general, but directed to the presentation that was made by Beatrice and the other gentleman.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions? Yes, just one more, please. Please keep it brief, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Obakeng. Just one observation and 3 questions. I've noticed that there was no mention of integrating artificial intelligence or disruptive innovation technologies in all the presentations. That's one observation. The questions that I have are 3. How to realign the financial architecture to address regional value chains and foster regional integration. The second question is, how should we embrace disruptive, innovative technologies that I spoke about earlier in addressing some of the challenges and opportunities that we talked about in as far as fostering regional integration? And lastly is the question of linking food security and the challenges of climate change. Similarly, are we not considering GMO? And if we are not considering GMO, what is the other alternative? I've heard Arthur talking about the fact that they have not considered South Africa because of its utilization of GMO on seeds. What other alternatives are there to address issues of food insecurity? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for those questions. I'll allow each of our presenters to answer either questions that were directed directly to them or to comment on some of the comments that were made. Clayton, I'll give you the floor first.
I don't think is a question that is falling within the scope of my presentation, so I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Ndirangu, you can go ahead. I think there were about 2 questions that were specific.
Sure. Thank you, Suzo, for that question. Yeah, the first question on financing and the mining sector. This is a very interesting sector that we find that is only multinationals that operate in this area. SMEs, they are not able to operate in this area. One of the issues is the challenge in financing because we find the small scale organization, they are not able to get this. As African, one thing we need to do is how can we finance them in better and simpler forms? For example, the young people don't have collaterals, they don't have to do this and the don't have you. How can we make more financing for them to operate with this? The other thing we can build the technology. We find that most of them does the manual in a manual format. Can we adapt technology and using the technology to make them have more capacity on this? Another thing is on collaboration and partnership. We find we work in silos. Can we use synergy among ourselves as Africans, such a way that the technology that is used in South Africa can be used in DRC, so that when we work in synergy, we're able to use the same technology across Africa on how to do the mining. The same way talk about the capacity building. Yes, we don't do capacity building, and how can we do the capacity building for the SMEs? One, can we develop entrepreneurial skills in our schools from the curriculum from grade 1? If we're able to develop these curriculum skills from our school, we make the pupils and the young people develop skill. You find most of us in our curriculum, we come with how to develop a CV, how to develop a resume. Instead of developing a resume, can we come with a unit on how to develop the skills to these students so that they can be able to participate in the market. The other thing, yes, we have the multinational on board. We have the registering company in most of the African countries. It's required for them to have local shareholding. But you find even the local shareholding, they are there just because of the requirement, ticking the box. Can we make a compulsory? The local shareholder should have this percentage, and the local shareholder should have control. For example, you cannot go and form a company in China or Europe and America and start trading this business there. Why as African, we open our doors for them to come and trade in? In fact, what's so happened in Tanzania this week, they ban some of the business being done foreigners. How can you do for us ban some of these businesses that be done by foreigners? And then finally, there's something that I'm talking about the finished products, especially in mining and other areas. We find we export raw materials. We get our mines, export them to Hong Kong. They have developed finished products. Then they are brought back as finished product to Africa and buy them very expensive. The other same thing, coffee and tea and the other products, we find we export them as raw material. When they come back to Africa, even the farmers that them cannot buy, can we add value to our products so that when we add value to them, we sell them a good price. The farmers and the producers, they're able to get very good value of them. And maybe to overcome all this, can we come with a blockchain technology? How can we use blockchain technology to help and assist all this in trade financing in Africa? And the other thing, is required in what we're doing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ndirangu. Sorry to cut you off. Arthur?
Thank you very much for the questions. So I'm gonna combine the question about the effects of high prices and solution, as well as the proposals of regional competition authorities solving this issue. So the effects of these high prices are effectively consumers are going to bear the brunt. So when you look at, for example, soya meal, which is processed to produce vegetable oil, and it's also processed to produce soya meal, which is an input to animal feed. It means that because these prices are high, that will translate into high feed prices, which means that the prices for the final product, which is, for example, poultry, will be high, and people now are paying higher for those products. And we know with constrained incomes, people then consume less, and that causes other issues of protein and all these other components. So the effect is that effectively the consumers will bear the brunt, and in some cases they'll reduce the consumption of those products because prices are high. And the solutions is what we're saying to say, because those are regional arrangements, it makes sense to have a regional body looking at them. But what they need is the data. What they need is what we're trying to do through the African Market Observatory, sitting at CCRED, to collect this data, to understand and align the differences in the pricings, and also to give an analysis of why we think some of these issues are playing out. And they've got different instruments. So you can do market inquiries to go deeper to say, what are the actual causes here? Is it the issues of barriers to entries? Are the issues of trade and so forth? And where you find that the traders are abusing their position, then there are instruments to deal with those issues of abusing their dominant positions as well. The second question relates to food security and climate change. And I think this is precisely what we are trying to advocate to say. Fortunately, as the continent, we are fortunate that these climate change issues are not necessarily happening at the same time in the same effect. So one part has got good rains, while the other one will have droughts. But if markets are working well in terms of price and trade, we shouldn't see this disparity. So the continent as a whole should still be food secure, but you need that to work well. You need the markets to work well so that you've got these benefits of trading and pricing coming across. That there's also issues of water management, that a lot of the farming in the continent is still irrigated, it's still rain-fed. So when there are droughts, they've got those impacts. Well, you can say when there are floods, it kind of like doesn't solve the issues, but when there are droughts, you can put those in place. You can also look at irrigation, water management, and also providing inputs at lower costs. As the example of Tanzania, where they put in place subsidies for fertilizers, there was an increased uptake, but also you can do that by also having competition issues addressed, because the reasons why the high price in fertilizer, because most of these things are imported from concentrated markets, and that's why they're so high, and farmers are using less of it. So it's a whole package of solutions, but we shouldn't lose the main focus to say at the basics of it is that markets need to work well in terms of pricing and trading, and that's how you mitigate through some of these issues, especially now that climate change is a reality. You can get all this climate changes happening, but you need those markets to work well so that we're able to mitigate and adapt effectively in those scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arthur. David, can you answer the questions that were addressed to you?
Yeah, thanks. I believe the first question was on what support are we putting for SMEs in mining value chains? And yeah, quite a few initiatives we have across the continent, actually. From a value chain, point of view, we have our ESD offering. So we have partnered with various mining companies across the continent to provide financing into their value chains. We effectively have two products. One is where we lend our own capital into SMEs within those value chains. So I can maybe mention Debswana in Botswana, for instance. We have an MOU with them, have extended over $1 billion pula of financing into SMEs within those value chains. That's our own capital. The other model we use is we also administer funds on behalf of mining entities, predominantly in South Africa. So, for instance, the Anglo-American Zimele program, we are the administrator of that fund. So this is where we are using Anglo-American's capital, but we effectively, run the credit checks, do the disbursements, do the collections, do the reporting on their behalf. So our mining book, if I look at our total asset book at the moment, our mining book is probably 75% of the total assets that we have disbursed into value chains across Africa. So significant, support going into that sector. Also from a non-financial support, we also partner with various organizations, business development service providers, that, provide capacity building, to SMEs in mining value chain. So significant interest in the mining sector across the continent. I think was a question around agro-processing and what we're doing to support agro-processing.
Sorry, David. Sorry, before you answer that, I've been asked to ask you to turn on your camera, please. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah. The second question was around to the support which we have within agro-processing. And from a value chain ESD point of view, we focused on really funding, if I can call it the middleman, so financing of agro traders, across the continent. We've got very good examples in Tanzania, particularly with commodities such as coffee and cashew nuts, and we're financing these traders to buy coffee from smallholder farmers or buy coffee from the coffee board, and they are then supplying onto large markets within Africa as well as mostly internationally into the eastern parts of the globe. I think the third question, which I then picked up, was around financial architecture. What needs to change there to kind of close this massive financing gap that we have? And I think it's really to look at, how you can attract, financing into a region and not into a country. We've got, different models. I think I mentioned the European Union, which have got interesting case study there, which is the European Regional, Development Fund, where they effectively take money from richer nations, so to speak, and deploy that money into infrastructure development within poorer nations. So funding models like that, we need to start, having a look at, how we can replicate something similar within specific regions. I think the challenge, obviously, in Africa is you don't really have developed countries. You have countries that are at a further spectrum in terms of their development, but you don't really have, developed countries where you can say you're now going to go and take a percentage of their GDP so you can apply it into, countries that are not as developed. I think a lot of countries, even at a high level of development, South Africa being a case in point, still have significant challenges that they need to fix, locally. So I think really here it's about how do you attract financing into the region, and, bodies such as SADC really need to kind of, play a central role in driving this, working with development financial institutions such as the African Development Bank.
Thank you so much, David. And on that note, I'd like to thank each and every one of our presenters. Unfortunately, we have completely run out of time. Tea break is now until 10:45, and I understand that we need to be done with the final session before we move to the final plenary. Thank you so much to our presenters. Can we give them a round of applause, please?